Moderation, right?
Moderation.
Yeah.
It is the distraction.
Absolutely. For distraction for us right here. I mean, sometimes I have to say his name 3 times for him to listen. Anyway, that's it.
That's on a good day.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for joining us on this Monday. We will see you right here the rest of the week. And Outnumbered starts right now.
Fox News alert, new fallout as President Trump and former FBI Director James Comey trade accusations after the former FBI director testifies behind closed doors to Congress and then goes in front of the media and goes after the president. This is Outnumbered, and I'm Melissa Francis. Here today is Harris Faulkner, Fox News contributor Jessica Tarlov, host of Kennedy on the Fox Business Network, Kennedy, and joining us on the couch for the first time, Marine Corps veteran and Republican Congressman Mike Gallagher of the great state of Wisconsin.
Woo-hoo.
And you have the socks to join us here.
Yeah, there we go. Bring the flag.
You know about the sock fashion. That's what we count on the guys for.
We have to give a shout out to both parents, one in Wisconsin and your dad in Fort Myers, Florida.
My dad, who is the biggest fan of this show in all of America and has been threatening me, at times trying to bribe me into going on this show.
Wow.
So this is his
So
Christmas
it only
present.
took money to get you here?
So Dr. John Gallagher, hi, how are you? Merry Christmas.
That was a very smart way for you to kick this off. Yeah. Now let's get going. The president and the former FBI director tearing into each other after Comey's closed-door testimony Friday before the House Judiciary and Oversight Committee. Comey frustrated the GOP lawmakers, repeatedly saying that he did not know or could not recall when asked questions central to the investigation into Russian meddling in the 2016 campaign. Then last night at an event in New York City, Comey said this.
All of us should use every breath we have to make sure that the lying stops on January 20th, 2021. I understand the Democrats have important debates to have about who their candidate should be. They have to win.
Yeah.
They have to win.
All right, that was after President Trump had weighed in on Twitter yesterday morning, tweeting, "Leakin' James Comey must have set a record for who lied most to Congress in one day. His Friday testimony was so untruthful. The whole deal is a rigged fraud headed up by dishonest people who would do anything so that I could not become president. They are now exposed." A transcript from Comey's closed-door testimony was released over the weekend. It shows that Comey admitting that information used to secure a warrant to surveil members of the Trump campaign wasn't verified. And despite this, Comey told reporters later that allegations of mishandling investigation are, quote, nonsense. South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham takes issue with Comey's assessment.
Well, my biggest reaction was he made a statement after he testified that the FISA warrant process, basically to look into that would be sort of a joke. I don't think it's a joke at all that a warrant was issued based on a document paid for by a political party, prepared by a foreign agent that's unverified to basically surveil a member of a presidential campaign. That's not funny to me. I want to know how that happened and the role he played.
I would add to that. So the president tweeted on 245 occasions former FBI Director James Comey told House investigators that he didn't know, didn't recall, couldn't remember, etc. The tweet went on. You look back at the person who served as special counsel to Comey, former federal prosecutor Bill Mateja, who said that Comey has a photographic memory.
Apparently not.
Well, or he's lying when he says he doesn't remember.
Well, I think I should caveat this by saying I'm not on the Committee of Jurisdiction, so I wasn't actually in that hearing. But Comey just comes off as a very self-aggrandizing and politically motivated actor. And I think he actually undermines his own case, and it makes it more difficult to figure out what happened and what didn't. And I think it's strange credulity to think that he had no awareness of any connection between the DNC and Fusion GPS, and also having reviewed all the classified material and the full report of the House Intelligence Committee. I came away being very concerned with the FISA process and what information was used as a pretext for a warrant. So I don't think dismissing it is helpful at all.
To that point, this is what was said about that process. You're talking about the unverified document that went into FISA. This was from Congressman Radcliffe. You, in your capacity as FBI director, referred to the Steele dossier as salacious and unverified. Comey says, yes. I don't know that I was referring to all of that. But again, your characterization was that it was unverified, even though you had verified it in court. What I understand by verified, Comey says, is that we will try to replicate the source information so that it becomes FBI investigation or conclusion rather than reliable sources. That work wasn't completed by the time I left in May 2017, to my knowledge. Jessica, sounds like they used fake dossier to get a warrant, and he knew it.
I think he is attesting to the fact that that process wasn't completed, but it eventually was. I think this is normal grounds for questioning him, and I agree with your assessment. I think, as we've discussed many times on the couch, that James Comey has unified the left and the right, which is difficult to do these days. But I think what the president is trying to do by focusing on Jim Comey right now, instead of talking about what happened on Friday with the SDNY report on Michael Cohen and the Manafort report as well from Bob Mueller, is to avoid discussing very real issues for him, obviously having to do with the payoffs and the fact that his company is implicated in all of this. So it's much more convenient to go after Jim Comey than it is to deal with the very real threats that are facing his administration as a result of what he did in the campaign.
Kennedy?
So he didn't bother to ask these basic questions. What sort of a law enforcement director is he if he's not asking who paid for it, who were the parties involved, what was their motivation, what was the information they were going after, what is our relationship with this central person who is gathering the intelligence from Russian operatives who, by virtue of their involvement in the campaign, could be incredibly problematic. So if he doesn't know the answers to these basic questions, then he himself is incompetent. And if he does have a photographic memory and he knows the answers to these questions and he's stonewalling or lying about it, then he is guilty of what he's accusing the president of, and therefore he needs to extricate himself from the process immediately. It just goes to show that James Comey would have been fired by either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, and he is only out for himself. The fact that he is out there stumping for Democrats when he has been accused of being politically motivated against the president this entire time, it basically justifies the opposition against him.
But he's also accused of being politically motivated against Hillary, because he's the one that ruined her campaign with dumping that letter 11 days before.
I would say that Hillary Clinton would have fired him much faster.
I agree.
Because she was still wondering what happened in her loss and was looking in his direction, I'm certain, because of what happened on July 5th of the summer before the election. You know, well, maybe she did, maybe she didn't. No, I guess she didn't. So there was a lot of there with her and their relationship. I think he would have been gone. So I had questioned in the beginning why the current president didn't fire him right away, too. Because if the side that he was on couldn't trust him, who could trust him? That's one thing. So I know you're not on this particular committee, but you've questioned people before. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious how it works. So you get a bite at the apple with James Comey, and then you get another one. Mm-hmm. So do you try to go down a road where he didn't remember? Like, was he sent home to do some homework? Say, well, could you work on your memory for these 161 or whatever times it was? And like, what's the goal for the next time?
Well, listen, I think, unfortunately, how it usually works is that...
Because there's going to be a next time.
Well, usually there's a camera on, and so people take advantage of their 5 minutes not to actually ask questions, but rather to deliver...
What, lawmakers Brandeis?
I know, this is going to come as a shock to
breaking
everybody. But I think you have some very effective questioners on that committee, Trey Gowdy in particular. It's sad to see that we're losing him in the next Congress, but the goal is just to get information, right? And as I've said from the beginning of all of this, it's hard to keep up, honestly, with just the turns every day, but sunlight's the best disinfectant. Let's get it all out there. Then we can all sort of lock ourselves in a cabin at the end of it, read the reports, and come to a dispassionate assessment about this.
I don't want to be locked in a cabinet with any of these people. I just want them to ask really good. I'm sure it's a great.
How can he not anticipate? I mean, but to your point, how can James Comey not anticipate the questions that he was going to ask? And then that awkward giraffe immediately went out to the camera and said, all they did was ask me dumb questions about Hillary. Oh, this is so stupid. It's like, no, the American people want the answers to these basic questions that have remained a mystery and created giant gaps where people are filling it with conspiracy
So there comes in my question. When you get another bite at the apple, do you go back down the same road? Do you try to ask your questions differently? What do you do when somebody says, I don't remember?
See, I would ask the question based on this. So you put forward a document for a FISA warrant that you hadn't completed. You say you didn't know whether it was verified or not. You were still working on it. Mm-hmm. So then why did you include it in a FISA warrant?
Why not ask the FISA judge that question? Why not ask the FISA judge, if this is an incomplete application, why on earth did you
approve
grant?
it?
Well,
but he was a trusted source. So Christopher Steele had worked with the government before. This wasn't a random person that they were just taking his
No,
word
they
for
had
it.
discredited
And it was
at that point. He wasn't
they
used
had.
as a source any longer.
And
They
James
had
Comey wouldn't
stopped
even answer
using it.
basic
They wouldn't
questions
use
about
it.
the relationship with Christopher Steele because there's so much embarrassment that he was in the FBI's employ.
The whole chain of command, him not knowing that Perkins Coie was involved in all of that, that seems hard to believe because, we're voracious news consumers, but we shouldn't know more than the former FBI director about how all of this happened.
100%.
Well, and I think the fallout of all this is that the American people will lose trust in an institution that we need to work, right? I have Marines that I deploy with that are now FBI agents. They need to have trust in their leadership, right? We need a functional FBI that has the trust of the American people, and I worry that that's what's getting lost in this
Very
process.
good. Good place to end, because that is all true. New questions over whom is the best person to replace outgoing White House Chief of Staff John Kelly. We'll tell you the names being discussed, and we'll debate what the White House needs as the president prepares for a re-election race and a possible report from the special counsel. Plus, the big bombshell among the legal filings that dropped last week, why the Democrats say the president should be worried.
The Michael Flynn filing was very significant. He met with the special counsel dozens and dozens of times and gave a great deal of information. I think the Flynn filing, if I were in the White House, would be the one that would make me nervous.
This program is brought to you by Lear Capital.
Whew, new fallout after the special counsel issued memos on Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen last week and on Michael Flynn earlier in the week. Now, for the first time, those filings are suggesting that President Trump may be connected to a federal crime, specifically a violation of campaign finance law. The incoming Democrat chair of House Intelligence even saying the president could one day be locked up over after he leaves office. Watch it.
There's a very real prospect that on the day Donald Trump leaves office, the Justice Department may indict him, that he may be the first president in quite some time to face the real prospect of jail time.
Republicans, however, like Senator Marco Rubio, are defending the president against what he calls a rush to judgment. And even independent Angus King, who caucuses with Democrats, says it's too soon to talk this way.
There's no reason to not stand by anybody in this moment. There are pleadings, there are cases, there are evidence. We're going to wait for all of it to be out there. And I would caution everyone to wait for all of it to be out there until you make judgment.
It continues to develop in ways that aren't favorable to the president. But I think, as you suggest, in the filings this week, there's nothing definitive, but there's nothing that exonerates the president either.
So the jumping of the shark, as they call it by Democrats.
Well, I think I agree with Angus King. I agree with Senator Rubio. And my Democratic colleague, Dan Kildee, I think, had a good message on the previous show. And he said, caution, listen, these are ongoing investigations. So everything we have now is pure speculation. I think it's also wise to be very skeptical about things we see being filtered through news stories, because in some cases there are selective leaks that are deliberately intended to put pressure on the White House. So let's calm down. And at a broader level, I know we just concluded an election and already we're in the midst of the 2020 presidential election. I don't want the vortex of 2020 to suck everything into its wake. There are 2 years where we can get some stuff done, and I urge and beg my Democratic colleagues not to go down this road.
So, Jessica, there is no shortage of people who blow through yield signs.
I've done it a few times myself. Maybe I will right now. I actually think that Jerry Nadler, who's really the one that this all kind of stops with, was quite reasonable what he was saying on the Sunday talk shows with Jake Tapper yesterday. He said, would these be offenses that could be impeachable? Yes. Are we necessarily going to be bringing impeachment proceedings? No. And I think it's important to highlight that. And when you say we should be cautious about how things are filtered through news stories and selective leaks, we actually got something special on Friday that we could read the reports for ourselves. The SDNY was very clear about what happened here, that the president ordered Michael Cohen to commit a crime. And a campaign finance violation is a violation. I know it's not your grand story of collusion yet, but in there was also evidence that Michael Cohen had talked to the Russians more than he said, that deal with the Russians would have been worth hundreds of millions of dollars, that $50 million penthouse for Vladimir Putin, and Manafort as well, with more contact with the Russians.
So, Melissa, no doubt, from what some of the information that came down from Friday, this was, a lot for the White House to chew on. And so people were talking about, specifically Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida, should he be pardoning some of the people who are speaking like a Paul Manafort? I want to hear again from Senator Rubio, and then let's talk about what he said. Senator Rubio was asked about this. Let's watch.
It would be a mistake, and I would strongly counsel against it. I don't think that, in my view, the presidential pardon power was not created for these sorts of purposes. I just think it would be the wrong thing to do, and I think it would be a huge political mistake as well.
I was trying not to move because you were looking at me, and I'm obviously not Marco Rubio, but you could hear his voice.
Yeah.
So we get the gist of it. He says that would be a huge mistake.
It would be a huge mistake.
Why?
I mean, because the crimes that were committed by Paul Manafort were actual crimes and had nothing to do with what is currently going on, and it just wouldn't make sense. I mean, yes, there is something to the fact that he had been investigated before and he wouldn't have been pursued this last time were it not for his connection to the president, but it doesn't change the fact that he broke the law in a big way. I would also say that when you go back to this idea of, oh, his campaign, criminal, is fraud, the campaign finance or whatever. I mean, we all know, and I know we're getting tired of hearing this, but, President Barack Obama also campaign finance violations, 1.8 million that were not reported.
It wasn't to fraudulently win the election. That's what Jerry Nadler was making the point of. That wasn't the same.
$5,000. So
that was
the same
repaid.
thing.
It wasn't weeks out from an election, and it's not like John Edwards either. I believe that those are false comparisons.
So how do you, not reporting that
John
people
Edwards had
gave
a
you money.
baby.
doesn't help you win an election? I mean, obviously, if you're accepting money from people, it's to win an election.
But it was
So that's
repaid.
crazy.
They dealt with it right away in the proper way. That's why no hay was made of it. Weeks out
lot
for
of
an
hay was
election.
made of it. They had to pay $375,000.
No. I mean, it wasn't
Before
argued
you
the
guys go
false
around
election.
the bend one more time with breaking news now. Reports of accused Russian spy Maria Butina appears to have reached a plea deal. A source familiar with the plea agreement says she will plead guilty to count 1, conspiracy to violate the foreign agent statute, second count dismissed for her. A cooperation as it relates to her activities to the United States on facilitating, quote, a better U.S.-Russian relations situation. She admits that she acted as a foreign agent without registering. And, of course, one of the first ways that America saw Butina was at that question and answer venue where the president was, and she raised her hand to ask a question. Congressman, what do you make of this?
Well, I'm just hearing it for the first time. But listen, I actually think people on both sides should want to get a full understanding of what the Russians were and weren't doing in our last election. Because I think...
What were they doing?
Well, I think they were clearly trying to cause exactly what we're seeing now, which is chaos politically, get us to attack each other, get us to be at war with each other, and prevent anything from getting done. But I think what's ironic about the current scenario, if they're idea was to get a administration that was sympathetic to the Russians. They got indeed the exact opposite.
So what weren't they doing? Because you said it was were and weren't.
Yeah, well, we don't have a full understanding of the scope of money that they were spending in this election. From what we know about what was spent on Facebook, it was actually a very small amount right now. And I actually think we're going to see that this is the tip of the iceberg in terms of countries beyond Russia, like China, throwing money around the globe in an effort to undermine Western democracies, in an effort to get us to be at war with ourselves.
You think this is the tip of the iceberg, so
I do,
to speak.
indeed. And I think people are profiting from the complexity in some cases of our campaign finance laws and the lack of full transparency.
I would add to that, and I don't think it's just Russia. And I do think Russia is doing that. And I brought this point up on Steve Hilton last night. I think that there is some Russian involvement in what's going on in France, because I think discord benefits them, particularly when it comes to energy. Yeah. And I don't trust him.
So that was the breaking news. Thank you for responding to that. We'll move on. Battle lines already being drawn over President Trump's expected nominee for Attorney General. We'll debate where this could go. And the chief of staff position is open. Hang out the shingle after the president announced John Kelly will be leaving soon. So which qualities should the president look for in a new chief of staff? Congressman Gallagher, you have a lot of qualities.
Take myself out of the running.
Oh, he cut his own mic off. We'll be right back.
If he had a good hub and spoke system and he had one guy as his chief of staff that really liked him, and then he had fortification of confidence of those other people, the thing would actually run very seamlessly, just the way it did inside the Trump organization.
President Trump is looking for a new chief of staff after announcing over the weekend that John Kelly would depart by the end of the year. Former White House communications director Anthony Scaramucci says that President Trump wants a team player, but not a yes man.
The president needs somebody that really likes him, likes his agenda, and wants to work with him on his agenda. And he also needs somebody that can push back on the president the way the president likes to be pushed back on. I think the big misnomer is that the president likes sycophants. I think the real people that are closest to the president realize that he doesn't like that at all. If anything, he likes an honest, rigorous debate.
Several names are already being floated for the job after Nick Ayers, chief of staff for Vice President Mike Pence, took himself out of the running yesterday, saying he too would leave the administration by year's end. Among those said to be under consideration, House Freedom Caucus co-chair Mark Meadows, Office of Management and Budget Director Mick Mulvaney, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, and U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer. There are a couple names on that list that I can't imagine Steve Mnuchin doing it. I mean, I think he's had a chief of staff for his whole adult life. He's not going to be one now. What do you think?
Already said he's not doing it.
He said he's not doing it as well. That's true.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, the only one of the four that I know personally is Mark Meadows, and he's a heck of a guy. I really like him personally. I think he would bring sort of a good knowledge of how the Hill works and also some political instincts to the job. And really, there's no model, right? It just depends on what the president wants. You can sort of tailor the job however you want it. I suspect the president kind of operates as his own chief of staff in many ways.
Isn't that the problem, though?
Yeah, well, I don't know. It just depends on what works for the president, what doesn't. There's no, I mean, history is rife with different models for how you do that in National Security Advisor.
Yeah.
So my big question would be what's on the list for what works for him, because he's had a military general, he's had people in that position that you think would be kind of more model-like. Kennedy, what do you think should be on that list now?
Well, now we are going into the 2020 campaign, like it or not. So you do need someone, and I think Mark Meadows is a better fit because of that, because he understands the political side of the operation. And I think Anthony Scaramucci is right in that the president doesn't need a yes man, but he needs someone who has a temperament that works with his, and someone who fits into his intuitive glove.
But Congressman, do you think he needs someone who's rigid, who's like a military leader who would sit there and is very strict?
Apparently not.
Or does he need, well, I mean, that's what John Kelly, they say he kind of kept, he kept the door, and didn't let people through, but he was there for a while in terms of this position. Does he need that, or does he need someone that's more flexible, in your opinion?
Well, me personally, this reflects my background and bias. I tend to favor what's called the honest broker model that tends to be applied to what you would want in a national security advisor. But I think the same holds true in chief of staff, which is to say it's your duty to present the president with a range of options and also tease out the political implications of various decisions. So someone who can manage that process, which is chaotic and difficult under even the best of circumstances, that's a rare find in Washington, D.C.
I wonder if somebody like a Bill Shine, who used to work at this staff, I was watching earlier with Kevin Corke reporting and Bill Himmer, and they brought his name up.
I haven't heard that. I think to the Mark Meadows point, I agree with Kennedy going into an election. It makes sense to have someone who knows about campaigning, knows what you should be doing strategically. Mark Meadows is also incredibly aligned with the president about Hillary Clinton. You see in his last few weeks as a chairman, he wants to have more email investigations and things like that. So that feeds the president's interest in keeping the lock her up narrative going. But to all the people out there that are saying John Kelly was such a terrible chief of staff, President Trump largely got what he wanted with John Kelly there. I mean, he was one of the chief architects of the family separation policy under the Trump administration. He helped him get tax cuts through. He didn't have a good relationship with Ivanka and Jared, which I heard was part of the problem here. But I think that John Kelly, for as much as he could do as a military man, did serve the president quite well. And
he did apply systems, absolutely. But also, what about Matthew Whitaker, who was the chief of staff at the Department of Justice?
Right.
And, the president named him interim AG.
And when I was watching the conversation between Himmer and Corke, one of the things that they brought up, too, was that the president might want to go inside. And if he does that inside the White House, that's why they had brought up Bill Shine's name. So you got to watch America's Newsroom.
Well, I did, but I was getting my hair done, so I couldn't hear it over the blow dryer.
Bill, we love. All right, the battle lines are being drawn over the president's plan to nominate William Barr as the next attorney general. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham on Sunday Morning Future said there's no reason Barr should not be the next AG. Watch it.
What is the likelihood that William Barr gets confirmed as the next AG, sir?
Unless there's something really strange, 100%. He's been confirmed 3 times. He's been the former Attorney General for Bush 41, the Deputy Attorney General in charge of the criminal division.
Yeah, Democrats really liked him, but maybe not this one. Democrat Senator Richard Blumenthal says Barr's past comments make him a threat to the Mueller investigation should he be confirmed as AG, and he believes that it's a concern on both sides of the political aisle.
I think they want this investigation to be completed, and their fear is that there's an attorney general who will, in effect, commit another Saturday Night Massacre, even if it's a Saturday Night Massacre in slow motion. Remember, William Barr has cast aspersions on the prosecutors in Bob Mueller's office.
The whole point.
Opposition to Barr is not coming from the left. Republican Senator Rand Paul expressing concerns about Barr and his stance on the Patriot Act. Watch it.
I'm concerned that he's been a big supporter of the Patriot Act, which lowered the standard for spying on Americans. And he even went so far as to say, you know, the Patriot Act was pretty good, but we should go much further. I'm disturbed that he's been a big fan of taking people's property, civil asset forfeiture, without a conviction.
What do you think?
Well, first of all, I thought this was a brilliant pick. I mean, in 1991, when he was confirmed before, it was unanimously on a voice vote in the Senate. So you have to ask yourself, what's changed since then? And unfortunately, I hate to say it, but I think the Senate as an institution, which is downstream from things that have happened in our politics, has just become hyper-partisan and politicized. And people like this, who used to be overwhelmingly supported by both sides, are now subject to this crazy, hyper-partisan, tribal political process.
You know what I don't want to miss? Okay, so we had the passing of a president last week, and this pick was someone who was on that former president's team.
Yeah.
And so it seemed to be in a moment, at least maybe because I'm so Pollyanna-ish, I suppose, I have optimism for the country getting back to those moments of civility.
Yeah.
And maybe feeling like this was a team pick. So when I hear Senator Rand Paul, I wonder, where do you go with that information? What do you think about it, Kennedy?
I think those are 2 critical issues to ask of a future attorney general, is about surveillance and about civil asset forfeiture. The Supreme Court just heard argument in a civil asset forfeiture case, which could have massive implications for all of the states and how they essentially, without due process, take innocent people's stuff. That's really critical, and a lot has changed on those 2 issues, and the world has changed since 1991 and since 9/11, and he will have to come into a Justice Department that reflects that change. It has been a generational shift, but what I would like to see here is some very, you know, we talked about grandstanding a little earlier.
You're going to go right where I was going to ask.
You know, these senators cannot grandstand. They have to ask critical questions.
They have to do their jobs, Kennedy.
And solicit answers that their constituents need to hear. This is a really critical time. I think they blew it with Jeff Sessions, and they do need to apply a little bit of pressure.
But there's not a lot of evidence that they're going to do that thoughtful, you know, diligent work. But if you look at Blumenthal saying it's a slow motion Saturday Night Massacre.
What is that even? I mean,
that's that's the whole point of a Saturday Night Massacre is it happens on Saturday night. And what he's talking about, slow motion, that's like normal turnover.
Yeah.
You get rid of people and new people come in. I mean, what a stupid thing to say.
So I want to make this point with you, Jessica, just about finding that civility again. When you have someone whom Democrats have embraced in the past, because unanimous that's an embrace. That's not just a few people taking it for the team. So as you go forward, I love what Kennedy's saying. You know, if everybody just steps up and does their jobs and gets the answers, we might be able to move on with a quick confirmation of someone who could pull some things together in this country. Is that too optimistic?
It's a little too optimistic, but I still think it's feasible. And I think that William Barr has a role to play in that, because he could show up to his confirmation hearings and in his opening statement address the comments that he's made about the Mueller probe head on to say, I made these comments, perhaps they were hasty. I will support the probe no matter what. I'm not looking to get in their way. And there are people, lawyers, who are saying the Mueller probe is going to keep going no matter what. Jim Comey even said that in his testimony, that there was nothing that was going to stop it at this point. But I think William Barr can help there. civility would be a great thing. And I would add to it that, yes, last week was a meaningful week for us as Americans, but this is also a smart strategic move on the president's part, taking advantage of the fact that we are in this moment of embrace of H.W. Bush and saying, I'm picking his guy, and he can serve me as well as he served the former president.
Totally.
And he's better than Sessions.
Can I just add one thing? The only way Democrats won't have massive resistance to whoever the AG nominee is would be to nominate Robert Mueller himself to be Attorney General.
That is an outside-the-box
It is, but
solution.
it takes care of two problems, doesn't it?
Well,
really bring the last word on this.
Well, I think Kennedy is right to bring up, in the intervening years since '91, there has been a continuation of what I think is the most damaging trend to our Constitution, which is to say, under presidents of both parties, the presidency as an institution has grown and grown in power. And so I hope we have that debate about Article 1 equities versus Article 2. But the standard didn't used to be, does this person agree with all of my policy commitments? It's, are they qualified? Are they high integrity? And yes, we can have an honest disagreement about interpreting the Constitution. Absolutely.
Right?
Unquestionably, in my view.
I don't know if we'll get to it, so I'm going to just say it real quickly right now. One of your big things that you're on is that most of the people on Capitol Hill need to work more days of the year.
Yeah.
And so those are the types of things that you would like to see talked about.
Yeah, well, so listen, we just got our schedule for the next year.
I follow you on Twitter.
Okay, but I think we're working 130, and then if you actually do the math in terms of fake days, so today we have a vote at 6:30, but it's, renaming a post office. Fake, not to be conflated with fake news. It's more like 100 days. So in what other job would you be able to work
That's
only
ridiculous.
100 days?
They locked off 30 days because on those other 30 days, it's like
Yeah.
lightweight stuff.
Totally.
Evidence that millennials want to work hard, which we rarely, we're the same birth year.
That's right. 84. Air high five.
Move on. The border wall battle continues in Washington as the threat of a partial government shutdown is looming again. They just did the thing that pushed it for 2 weeks. The big meeting the president will have with top Democrats on whether he can get the $5 billion he wants for his wall. Stay close.